We cheat on everything, every day. Every day is a lie. This is extremely hazardous for the American people to have a political system that is completely untrusted and untrustworthy by others.
So recently, Jeffrey Sachs went on Andrew Napolitano's podcast and talked a little bit about how America is worse off now that it's taken part in Israel's war with Iran, joined it as a belligerent, and the ramifications of that not only for the Trump administration, but for American diplomacy and foreign policy in general going forward. Jeffrey Sachs is one of the best geopolitical analysts in the world as far as I'm concerned, so let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
As recently as yesterday, Sunday, on Fox Business, where he boasted once again that his bombs, and he used that phrase, totally obliterated the nuclear capabilities of Iran. Is this true or isn't it true?
It's plainly false. It is absolutely false. Iran did not sit around with its enriched uranium waiting for this to happen. It almost surely secreted it out to other sites. There's no doubt that Iran continues to have the capacity. It hasn't wanted to do it, but it has the capacity to create atomic bombs out of the enriched uranium. It still has centrifuges. Some are saying it sets back that timeline if Iran were to choose it by a few months. I'm not even sure of that, given all of the analysis that we have heard. There is simply no way that a firm conclusion can be reached that this ended Iran's nuclear capacities. It did not. Now, I think it's also important to say that Iran has made perfectly clear for 20 years, and I had discussions today with a senior Iranian diplomat. They don't want atomic bombs. They don't want the burdens of them. They do not want to make themselves a target of nuclear war in that way.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reason to believe that that's actually true. Not only has the supreme leader issued a fatwa, a religious edict, saying that Iran won't seek nuclear weapons, but Iran has expressed interest, at least in the past, of joining a nuclear-free Middle East movement. And I mean nuclear weapons-free. They want to maintain a nuclear energy program just like every modern nation, of course. That notwithstanding, they're interested in a nuclear weapon-free Middle East. You know who vetoes it? It's the U.S. and it's Israel, because Israel happens to have a secret nuclear weapons program. Now, he's also right. It doesn't seem like we took out, I mean, we meaning my criminal government, by the way, all of their nuclear enrichment capacity. We might have gotten, a lot of rubble above those 3 facilities, but that doesn't matter if they move the uranium out. And there does seem to be strong indications that they did move a lot of it out, especially at Fordo, where satellite imagery captured large motorcades a few weeks before the strikes, presumably to take the uranium out. Listen, they've had 8 years after the JCPOA was shredded by Trump, which instituted an inspections regime and instituted guidelines by which, by all measures, they were complying. And they've had 8 years to be able to move those facilities elsewhere, create new secretive facilities, and do whatever it takes to shift their resources in a way that would allow this to continue. Now, if I'm an Iranian nationalist, I want to fast track a nuke now, and it's obvious why. We saw what happened, and if I'm a patriot, an Iranian patriot telling the government what to do, it's to fast track a nuke so the U.S. doesn't mess with you like it doesn't mess with North Korea.
They do not want them, but they do not want to be overthrown by Israel's murderous government. And that is a problem. And last week was an attempt by the Israeli government, which is a rogue state, the most dangerous on the entire planet, to kill the Iranian leadership. Not only the supreme leader, but government officials as well. They succeeded in many murders but they did not succeed in the regime change operation.
Thankfully, but that's what Netanyahu's wanted this whole time. Same with the neocons. Same with the crying likes of Ben Shapiro and Mark Levin and John Bolton that are beside themselves now that it seemed like regime change in Iran was on the cusp of happening. But Trump had to take that off-ramp because, people wouldn't be killed then. This is the neocon logic. They're still going to clamor for it. Netanyahu's still going to clamor for it. And really, we were only able to take that off-ramp because of Iranian restraint. Iran could have killed massive amounts of U.S. forces, not only in naval vessels, but in the military bases in the Arabian Peninsula, and they didn't. They don't want a war. It's very clear. This episode proves that they don't want a war with the United States and Israel. And they have a propaganda victory now with their people who they can tell, hey, we stood up against the biggest bullies on the block and we're still here.
Then came this U.S. bombing of these sites. It did not change anything, in my view, in the nuclear calculation, but it made everything far worse in terms of the potential. When I say didn't change anything, it didn't change anything in terms of Iran's capacity to produce atomic bombs, or, by the way, to obtain them from others.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to believe that it would be a persuasive thing for some other powers to give Iran their nukes anyways, if they don't have that capacity. A lot of people have pointed to Pakistan. I'm a little skeptical of that because Pakistan is Sunni and they're not exactly aligned with the Shiite-controlled Iranian government in many ways. But I think Putin was in communications with the Ayatollah too and giving him advice on how to handle this. This has to push Iran closer to Russia and China, and Russia probably closer to China than it was already before this because of the duplicity of the United States. Just as it's always been, almost my entire lifetime, there's no reason to trust that the United States will handle things diplomatically. We lead. Our criminal government leads with military strikes. It leads with regime change. It leads with crippling sanctions that, kill innocents that aren't even involved in the government. That gives the Russian regime excuses to say, hey, all of our problems are due to the U.S. It's a propaganda victory for them, and it can galvanize a population against the U.S. anyways.
All it did was make the situation far more dangerous because now there is no inspection taking place. The Iranians know without question that they were targeted in a very deadly regime change operation. They know that the United States was party to it. They know that European countries are basically vassal states of the United States, so won't say one word on their own. So they know that they were targeted for assassinations and regime change. That does not make the situation safer today than last week. It makes everything far more reckless and dangerous.
Yeah, I have to agree with them. This has ramifications far beyond Iran, and I actually think a lot of other powers will seek nuclear weapons where they haven't before because of this. They saw what happened to Gaddafi versus Kim Jong-un, and they're going to proceed accordingly. That has to be the worldwide geopolitical lesson from all of this madness.
So I guess the answer is also no. When President Trump boasts, as he did as recently as last night, that Iran was, quote, weeks away, close quote. Secretary Hegseth has said the same thing, from developing a bomb. There is no basis for that. It's just political claptrap.
If Iran wanted to make a mad dash for a bomb, it could have done so in the past. There is, as I think everybody now understands, a religious ruling many years ago that Iran does not want a bomb. There were negotiations for years where Iran said, we give over our nuclear materials, we open ourselves up to inspection, we do not want a bomb. We do not want unilateral disarmament because Israelis will murder us, period. So they don't want to be murdered by Netanyahu and his gangsters, But on the other hand, they don't want a bomb, even though Israel, of course, has many nuclear weapons. If there's a rogue state in terms of atomic weapons, it's, of course, Israel.
Yeah.
Why is
which
there
is
no
not.
conversation about that?
Well, yeah, I'll just say to back up what I said before, Sachs is right about this. Historically, that is true. But again, I think that the U.S. has done everything imaginable to convince the Iranian regime now to seek a nuke. And that's one of the biggest reasons, and probably the biggest very reason why this whole maneuver was counterintuitive. It was risky. It put, the fates of U.S. soldiers in that region in the hands of the Iranian regime. And thankfully, they acted completely to the contrary of what the neocons and Netanyahuists thought they would. But that's where we're at, and a lot of people will want to seek a nuclear weapon now. I can't exactly blame them.
Why is there no national in the U.S. or international conversation about how Israel, without signing the non-proliferation treaty, without permitting any inspections, and on the basis of stolen information, has a nuclear weapon, but Iran's not permitted to have one? What kind of justice is that?
Yeah.
And not only does Israel have nuclear weapons, it's not only and also not part of the non-proliferation treaty, but of course there's no international verification or inspection of anything that Israel does. There is discussion all over the world, just not in the United States and its vassal states in Europe and in Israel. So this is a game. It's the ultimate double standard. But that's part of the point of empire, by the way. The American policy is not to pretend that there is a consistent line. The Americans and the Israelis, in their way, want to say there are rules. The rules apply to you. We do anything we want and don't forget it.
Yeah, that's true. This is one aspect of empire building where you have a vassal state that isn't subject to the rules of all the other countries. And by the way, same with the United States. The only country that has actually detonated atomic bombs, by the way, is not subject to these inspections regimes in the same way. They are part of the IAEA. They are part of the NPT. But, the U.S. can get away with basically bullying around every country in the world over this when it's only the U.S. that has ever used these weapons in the first place. And by the way, they vaporized hundreds of thousands of people and left hundreds of thousands of more suffering and agony. That's what they did. So, yeah, I'm with Sachs. This is right. The only thing that I would say that maybe I disagree with is sometimes it seems like the U.S. is actually the vassal state of Israel rather than the other way around because of the prevalency and power of AIPAC and the Israel lobby. That's what guides us into these wars. And there are complicit actors in the United States that are fine with going along with that plan, by the way. They're called the neocons and the establishment liberals that are all on board this mad project and have been for most of my life. And for all the vitriol toward the neocons, it sure does seem like that foreign policy still reigns supreme in the good old US of A.
And that's not hidden. That's part of the whole idea. That is, we will kill you if you don't follow our rules. And we mean it. We don't have to follow them. We don't have to have international standards, but we have the rules. That's the so-called rules-based order. It means America sets the rules for others, not for itself. So there is discussion all over the world. But in the United States, there is not. And that comes back to our domestic politics. It comes back to the Zionist hold on American politics, which, remember, is as much or more a Christian evangelical movement as it is a Jewish movement. The Jewish community is more divided on this point than the Christian evangelicals, who vastly outnumber the Jews in terms of voting power and in terms of Trump's base. But there's a lot of money that is invested in making sure that the Congress of the United States is 100% subservient, and that whoever occupies the White House understands that their job is to do what Israel says.
That's true, and it's not just limited to Congress. It's also deep state bureaucrats and the president of the United States who boasts about how pro-Israel he is. That's why you have the president, posting out on Truth Social a few days back how great of a war hero Netanyahu is. No, he's not a war hero. He's a war criminal for waging a genocide in Gaza as we speak, trying to expand the West Bank settlements, cleanse Gaza, set up concentration zones. They're not shy about talking about this, by the way. Rafah is designated to be a concentration zone. So this is eerie and ghastly, probably one of the most deadly things that could ever happen, and the U.S. is complicit in bankrolling it. So yeah, the Israel lobby has its talons deeply within Trump. Trump boasts about it. He's boasted about how much support he's given the Adelsons. He received $100 million from his campaign from Miriam Adelson. And yeah, I know how politics works, and you can buy the U.S. president too.
Which country had the better outcome from the 12-day war, Iran or Israel?
Both lost. Israel suffered massive losses, many direct hits in Haifa, in Beersheba, in Tel Aviv, the Iron Dome, and the other parts of the system, because that's just one component of Israel's air defense system, failed on multiple occasions. Iran has missiles that can penetrate Israel's air defenses, and Israel got hit hard. But it could have and could be in the future hit far harder. So Israel suffered a lot. Of course, Iran suffered a lot as well. Many, many civilians dead, a failed regime change operation that in fact murdered many Iranian military leaders, that murdered many Iranian scientists. This was not a small event from Iran's side. This was a significant loss as well. It is not surprising. War is a lose-lose proposition. Not as these gangsters play it, these big shots in politics who don't suffer the consequences themselves. They have other people die as a result of their actions. But people died on both sides. The damage was very significant on both sides. The vulnerabilities are very significant on both sides. Israel has no impunity in this and will get hit harder and harder each time this is done.
Yeah, I'm with Sachs on this 100%. When he said war is a lose-lose proposition, I don't think any greater truth has been said in this video. If I'm calling balls and strikes, I'm saying that, yeah, losses were great on both sides. Actually, on the Iranian side, more lives were lost. I think it's about 600 people died in this fruitless calamity for no reason other than to prove that the Iranians weren't going to act the way that the neocons said, and to destroy a few facilities which may or may not have had enriched uranium in them. We still don't totally know, though it looks like they got some of it out of Fordo, despite what the Trump administration is saying. But yeah, war is a lose-lose proposition. Israel suffered a lot too. The Iron Dome was a sieve to some extent. They were also running low on cash and missiles, and many people have talked about that too, including Colonel McGregor. And yeah, that nothing good has really come from this from both sides, though I will say that the Iranians have a greater propaganda victory that they can sell to their own people by saying, hey, we stood up to the greatest powers on earth that were gunning for us, backed us into a corner, and we're still here, and we'll still survive. And that is not a message that the Israelis can really sell, and they're going to continue clamoring for regime change there, just like they always have.
Israel may have told, according to some stories, I have no idea whether it's true, may have assured Trump, don't worry, it's a 24-hour operation. We murder the whole top of the government. We have a new government in place shortly. All will go well. That obviously did not happen at all, nor did the defenses work the way that the Israeli censors want us to believe. There was direct military censorship from Israel after the second or third day. We did not see all of the damage, but people posted a lot of the damage, and we know that it was extensive, and very, very real, and very dangerous for Israel. But this is also just to say that
Sure.
Israel's been making wars for 30 years and drawing the United States into wars for 30 years that has not improved Israel's security. This is the irony. Same with the United States. We could be the most secure country in the history of the world, and yet we're closer to nuclear Armageddon than ever because of our flagrant, blatant irresponsibility of pushing us closer to the brink because we do not play fairly at all. We cheat on everything every day. Every day is a lie, and every day threatens to push us to the nuclear brink, whether it's with Russia or with many other countries that have nuclear weapons right now. It's the only risk we face, but we're not behaving the president and the deep state in a way which actually protects us.
Yeah, I have to agree with this. Not only the United States, but Israel behaves that way. The U.S. plunges itself into all these different affairs and different wars throughout the world. My entire lifetime, I've talked about it a lot on the channel. There's many different incidents. The Gulf War, Somalia, the Balkans, Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, now Iran, Yemen. All of these theaters were not beneficial to the U.S. Even Afghanistan, the one that people would say was the most beneficial, the U.S., after clearing out the Taliban and, all of the strangleholds of power that Al-Qaeda still clung to there, they still ended up having a 20-year occupation, learning the same failed mistakes that the Soviets did when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan, and there's nothing to show for it. We spent hundreds of billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of lives over 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. That's what happened, and Sachs is totally right about this. The U.S. does this. Israel does this. Israel's done this in Lebanon and what they're doing in Gaza. If you want other countries in international opinion to turn against you, just do exactly what the United States and Israel is doing right now.
Though we should be the safest people in the whole world, but we're absolutely, as the atomic scientists tell us in their doomsday clock, we're the closest to nuclear war and the closest to self-destruction since the start of the nuclear age. We're just blowing it because we cannot seem to understand basic facts of how to have stable, honest, truthful, peaceful relations with other countries.
That's true, and it's not really an international rules-based order. It's no rules and disorder because of how the U.S. behaves. And other countries aren't perfect either, but a lot of other countries are just responding in kind to what the U.S. has done in its empire-building schemes. And Pat Buchanan talked about the madness that exists under the empire scheming and the empire building. The old right was subverted by neocons. That's why the kind of word came about, because the old school right, like Robert Taft and Pat Buchanan, didn't want us to get embroiled in all these affairs. So yeah, I think Sachs is right. I hate to say that that's true, but that is the truth.
What did the United States gain by Trump's dropping of these bunker busters?
I think they wanted to try out these bombs. They wanted to look tough. Trump said it was the greatest bombing in the history of the world, or he compared it to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which itself is an amazing thing for any president to say, especially if one happens to know the history of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because the history is not, as every school child has been told for the last 80 years, that it saved American lives from invading Japan at the end of World War II. That's the bunkum story. The true story is that Japan was begging to surrender. It wanted to keep the emperor, the United States, said, we're going to drop the bombs first because Truman wanted to make a big show to Stalin, mostly.
Right.
And it did not save any American lives because in the end, the United States said, yes, the emperor stays anyway.
Yeah, this is 100% true, and there's been lots of material written about this, especially in recent years. Thankfully, it's coming to light for a lot of people that by May of 45, the emperor wanted to surrender, and Japan wanted to surrender, actually. They were willing to. It was reluctant, of course, but only if there were legal protections for the emperor. And the U.S. wasn't willing to accept that. They only wanted unconditional surrender, and that's why they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, on the record, supporting this, what I just said, what Sachs just said, is Dwight D. Eisenhower, the Supreme Allied Commander. It was Patrick Leahy, one of the top military officers in that war as well as Douglas MacArthur. So yeah, there were many people that said that that was a scheme to kind of start and enact a precedent for Cold War policy. And really, Japan ended up surrendering more because of Russia's entry into the war than the atomic bombs themselves. So I agree with Sachs there, too.
And neither of those bombs needed to be dropped. But I make the point that Trump he said, no, I shouldn't make that comparison. But then he made the comparison. That's not an accident. He's bloviating. He wants to say, look at how powerful the United States is. We can do what we want. We can blow you up. So that's what he thinks he gained. But in fact, it doesn't work this way in actuality. The United States can't do what it wants. A lot of the world understands that very, very well. The more we have this bloviating, the less the United States is able to enter into any kind of serious agreement with any other country on any substantive issue. This is extremely hazardous for the American people to have a political system that is completely untrusted and untrustworthy by others.
Yeah, I hate to say that's the truth. I agree with almost every word of Sachs here. The U.S. is a bad bully on the block, the one you don't want to mess with, and then if you do mess with them, they pretend you're the provoker, by the way. You're the aggressor, and then you have to be subject to regime change or a proxy war or any kind of these schemes that the empire builders design to enact regional hegemony in every corner of the world, including the Middle East, and a lot of it is done at the behest of the Israel lobby. We're drawn into a lot of these conflicts because of pro-Israeli senators, congressmen, deep state agents, presidents, on the U.S. side, and then the agitators in the Israeli government on that side. Netanyahu has been a big crux of it. And why the U.S. in any way trusts what that guy says or that guy's preferences as far as who we get involved with militarily is anyone's guess, because he's been proven wrong so many times and is a war criminal on top of it all. Iraq, remember, he said in front of Congress that positive reverberations would break out among the region as long as you remove Saddam Hussein. Well, that didn't exactly happen, right? But guess what? Even after that blunder, that blood-shedding decision that the U.S. made, they still trusted him in other regards, including when it came to overthrowing Gaddafi and trying to overthrow Assad, which they eventually got last year. But U.S. aid dumped $15 billion into that project, and the CIA ran a coup attempt there under Operation Timber Sycamore. So that's where we're at. The empire building always fails. The U.S. always gets involved in these wars, regardless of presidential occupant. Trump talked a big game about being more non-interventionist and not starting a new war. Well, he did start a new war, and all we've learned from it is one, Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. They didn't use them. Two, they're more likely to seek nuclear weapons now than they were before. Three, that Iranian public opinion is now galvanized in support of that regime more so than it was before. And four, that they didn't act in any way that the neocons thought. They exercised restraint in their reprisal attack, even tipping Trump off to it so as not to kill U.S. soldiers and allow for mass deaths. And we're at square one over this, and we've shelved any opportunity, it seems, to come to the table and actually have a new JCPOA to actually enact an inspections regime there. They're going to be out of the IAEA's crosshairs now and sights and cameras. And, you know, people will speculate more that they have nuclear weapons, and the U.S. will be drawn back into this madness, but I don't want that to happen. I do want to hear from you, though. Let me know down below, do you think Jeffrey Sachs is right that the U.S. is worse off because of this war with Iran, or that something beneficial has come from this that I'm not seeing? Let me know in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel, and please consider becoming a YouTube member or a Patreon patron. If you become a YouTube member, I'd really appreciate it, and you get a special benefit of being able to see all of my videos in advance of their release on YouTube. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.